How many of y'all had a good time at Winter Chill? Yeah? Shoot, me too. How many of y'all still tired from Winter Chill? Me too. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Austin Walker, and I get to lead our student ministry team, and it is just good to be back. We were off last week because our staff was managing 2 Winter Chills. If you haven't been to Winter Chill, maybe this is your first time. Winter Chill is our weekend retreat that we do every February. And the bad news is we just had it. The good news is wait 51 weeks and you'll get to go again. Because it is my favorite thing that we do. Unless you're a senior, then you've got to wait longer than that and lead a D group and all that stuff. But we'll get you one day. If you have your Bibles open to Ephesians chapter 4, that's where we're going to be spending our time tonight. And as you're opening to Ephesians 4, I just wanted to celebrate a couple things. First off, it was like the 3rd highest attendance for Winter Chill. We had 6 students give their life to the Lord. We can always celebrate that. We had dozens and dozens of stories make their way in of God just using that weekend to change lives. And then we also told those of you that were there, we told you something that we're going to go ahead and announce now, that we've got a new worship album coming out on April 1st. And that song that we just sang, Drawing Me, that's on that album. So if you go home and try and find it on Spotify, you won't find it yet, but it is on its way to Spotify. So for the 19 of you that I know have already sent me a text message, just wait. But that's going to be part of this album that's coming out, and that's one of my favorite songs. So I'm really, 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 really excited for y'all to get to hear that, for us to get to share that, and have it be part of just the culture of our student ministry. But tonight we're starting a new series. We're starting a new series called Lines. Everybody say Lines? So this is what I know is your absolute favorite thing. It's the series when your youth pastor talks to you about sex and dating. So if it's your first time here and your friend invited you to come, they knew that this, I'm just kidding, they didn't know. They had no idea. But don't worry, tonight's not the night we're talking about sex. That's not tonight. So if it is your first time, it's gonna be an awkward series, that's fine. But here's the thing, as we started talking about what we needed this content, what we wanted, what we felt like God was wanting to say in this series, really we started realizing anytime that we talk with students about dating relationships, romantic relationships, sexual relationships, the question that we always get is, hey man, but how far is too far? And we have this idea that relationships are all about this one line. If this is the line, it's okay, is that okay? Am I good here? What if it's I'm still kind of on, and it's that's not how it works. Relationships and dating and sex and all of that, it's not about am I on this side of the line or this side of the line, or am I going back and forth? It's gonna be awesome, it's gonna be fun, but where's the line? We realize that it's about more than just that one line. And I think we do a disservice by saying, and I didn't go into this with junior high because at this point, once I told them it was a series on sex, we'd lost all of them. They just were not paying attention. They're so we didn't go fully into this. But I think we in student ministry do a disservice by telling you the one thing that you need to know about dating relationships is don't have sex until you get married. Now go date. That's not the way that life works. And so we're really through this series, we want to talk about these different lines that you need to know, lines that are important for making you who you are, so that even if you don't end up dating at all, you still are in a good place. Because even my own life, my dad had 3 rules for dating growing up. His first rule was, you're the man, so you are responsible for transportation to and from the date. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, number 2, I'm your father, not your chauffeur, so I will not be the one driving you and your date somewhere else. I was okay, I feel like that's not helpful, Dad. I can't drive yet. And he goes, you see where I'm going. Number 3, you are not allowed to drive anyone in your vehicle until I say that you're a safe enough driver to drive anybody else, which turns out was 17 and a half. And so my dad effectively locked down dating until I was a senior in high school just by those 3 rules. Now, I would love to say like, that left a lot of broken hearts and a lot of women just bummed that they couldn't date me in 10th grade. That's not how it happened. It was just a convenient excuse like, dude, you got a girlfriend? Nah, man, my dad's rules. Just trying to be a good son. That's the reason, I promise. So he had those, like, a pastor that I used to keep up with, he said, oh, my daughter can date at any point. She just can't brush her teeth till she's 40. And so there's all kinds. Some are like, what? It's bad breath. Like, you'll get it. It'll catch up. There are all kinds of different rules, different lines. But here's the thing. When we look at dating relationships, when we look at lines really do two different things. And the first thing we think of is really boundaries. So I've got, you can see these two circles on here. We think of lines like these lines are creating a perimeter. They're creating boundaries. And the problem is, in our life, our first reaction to boundaries and our first reaction to lines that say do not cross is to say like, but that's where I want to be. I'm here. This seems better. And we honestly, like anytime someone puts a perimeter around us, we start being like, this is cool, but what's over there? And the example I use anytime we're talking about boundaries is if I were to take like a 5-year-old kid and go to the middle of downtown Little Rock, drop them off, let them like unbuckle their car seat, get out, and be like, okay, have fun, do whatever you want, and leave. Like, that's not loving. There's no boundaries, there's no restrictions, but that's not a loving care. Like, I should and would go to jail if I did that, which is why I feel like it's important to say it's a hypothetical. Like, I have not done that. That was just an example. But what's loving is to take that 5-year-old, whether it's your little brother, your cousin, somebody you're babysitting, and go to the playground and say like, hey, here's the playground, and yes, there's a fence around this playground. I need you to stay inside the fence because that's the best spot. I know it looks really fun over there, but that's called a highway, and that's not really fun. Like, the loving thing is to put these boundaries in place. And so when we're talking about lines in our dating life, lines in our relationships with other people, it's important for us to have these and realize these are not because we need to like mark out and be like, this is the no fun zone and this is where I live and life is terrible. Like, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is sometimes boundaries exist because it's the most loving thing possible. But here's the other thing that happens with lines when we say don't cross them. And we'll go into this another week. We got this tape, right? So let's say this is where we put our line, and we're saying, I'm not gonna cross that line. Actually, I don't really like that line. That looks better. Nope. That looks better. Nope. And here's what ends up happening. The more that you move your line, the more that you move these boundaries, the easier they are to move. The first time I about bent my fingernail backwards and had to try not to cry into the microphone just then. But now, like this is, it's got dirt, lint, fuzz. The more that we move the boundaries that we have in our life, the more that we move whatever lines we put in place to keep us in a good spot, the easier they are to continue to move. And before too long, they've lost all of their ability to keep us safe and keep us healthy and keep us in the right place that we need to be. The more that we move those, the less good they do. So lines they create boundaries. And I promise we're getting to Ephesians here in a second. The second thing they do is they create clarity. They create definition. Imagine if this was a work of art. It is not, but go with me here on this. If this was a work of art that I commissioned somebody to make, and they came in and added more lines here, and added more lines over there, and added some boundaries over here, and more lines of different color, eventually, the more lines you add, the more clarity there is to the picture, and you start to see a portrait emerge, where this is an eye, and this is an eye, and you start to see expressions. You start to see somebody's face. You start to see personality. Sometimes lines add boundaries, but sometimes they add clarity. Sometimes they add definition. Sometimes they help us see what we need to see. So in this series, as we're talking about the lines of our life, it's important for us to realize some of them are do not cross, and some of them we're adding to it. And so tonight, we're gonna talk about what I think are some of the most important lines, regardless of your dating situation, that you could have. Honestly, I think that this content, this idea of the lines we're talking about tonight is really, really important, even if you don't believe in Jesus. Like, even if you think everything that we believe as a church, I believe as a pastor, is dumb, I think tonight still matters. Because tonight we're talking about who people are. So when you have dating, it's imagine this is a person and this is a person, right? So these are kind of the boundary. This is who these people are. This is their identity. And the process of dating is I am a person and this is a person, and we're gonna see if we're compatible. We're gonna see if we go well together. Hopefully if you're dating in a healthy way, it's not like we're just gonna see if this works for the next couple months. Hopefully you're just dealing with this with the respect that it needs. And so you got these two people, but here's what we see. And I've been doing student ministry for a very long time. This is not specific to either gender. This is not specific to anybody's socioeconomic status, school, age, anything. If this is a person that wants to date that person, what ends up happening is they realize that person is actually more interested in someone who's right here. They're actually more interested in a person that looks, acts, behaves, or whatever like this. And so what happens is when you're looking there and you're like, that is the person that my heart doth love, and that is the person that I will pursue with everything in my soul, but that person wants someone like this, you start to notice people changing. It's what I call identity drift. You start to notice that people aren't really who you thought they were. Their identity starts to shift. Why? Because this is the person that they want. And here's the really dangerous thing. When you don't know who you are, eyes up here, because this is super important. And if this is a person that you know or you're sitting by, like, don't call them out because it'll be uncomfortable. If you don't know who you are and you know you want this person, before too long, you start drifting so far trying to figure out who it is that they want, and you let their desires dictate your identity. Before too long, you end up over here being absolutely nothing like you were before. And then either you're in this relationship and it breaks up, or you realize like, oh, I just see you as a friend. And you've changed everything about yourself, and now you're off completely different than who you were supposed to be in the first place, with no idea how to get back. And so tonight, as we're talking about this stuff about our identity, it's so vital, especially with dating, that you know who you are, that you know what makes you you, you know what's important in all of these things. There are times where I have seen, and I won't name names, and it's been a while since this person's been in student ministry, but in the span of 12 months, I saw a guy go from wearing Wranglers and cowboy boots to all like emo, to loving basketball, to wearing like polos tucked into khakis within 12 months. All because this dude just wanted these different girls to like him. And there's nothing wrong with any of those four things, but that's not who he was. His identity drifted. This past week, Maisie, my 4-year-old, had a career day at school, and y'all, I'm not gonna lie, it was adorable. Like, she wanted to be a pastor, and so this is how she dressed up. I'm telling y'all, like, I was a hot mess. This was Valentine's Day. She'd made individual Valentines for everybody in her class based off what they love. It was like, but like, look, she's got her little mic. She's got a water bottle, her Bible, black jeans. Like, she is ready to bring the word. She wanted to be a pastor so bad, and that's what she wants to be when she grows up. She tells me all the time, Dad, when I go to college, you're gonna teach me how to be a pastor. Dad, what if I don't know how to be a pastor? Will you help me? Dad, can I be a pastor in FS? If for whatever reason she really thinks y'all need to hear the story of Moses, I don't know why, but for the past years, every Wednesday, like, Dad, you gonna tell the students at SSM about Moses? So, no. And she's gotten to the point where she's like, you need to, I keep asking. So, like, sometime we might just talk about Moses just in case the Holy Spirit's speaking through my 4-year-old. It's something y'all need to hear. But she really, really, really wanted to be a pastor. And so that day she dressed up as what she thinks a pastor is. And we could take that picture down, or else I'll just turn around and stare at it the whole time. The thing is, that same day, she pretended to be Elsa, a horse, a creepy monster, and a baby. It is It is adorable when my 4-year-old tries to be different things for fun. It is really, really sad when adults and high school students try and be a bunch of different things that they aren't. What's okay for my daughter, figuring out who she is and figuring out what's fun and dreaming and playing, is not okay for someone in high school. It's not okay to be a different person every single week, hoping that you figure out who it is that this person likes. You need to know who you are. And so Paul, he's writing to this church in Ephesus that he's planted, and he's telling them all about what it means to follow Jesus. And then he starts talking in chapter 3 about what it means to use your giftings and to serve one another and honor one another. And then he gets to this stuff in chapter 4. We're just going to start with 17 through 20. He says this: "With the Lord's authority I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they're hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they've closed their minds and hardened their hearts against him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. But this isn't what you learned about Christ." Paul says, they didn't, beforehand, you had no idea who you are. You didn't have a picture that gave you an outline of your identity. He talks about how Gentiles, these people who don't know Jesus, he says they were wandering around in their life with no clarity, with no idea. It'd be like if you were in the middle of a football field blindfolded and you had to go find a nickel. It's like, there's just no way you're gonna be able to find that. There's too much darkness, there's too much emptiness, there's too much unknown. It's hopeless. But, verse 20, that's not what you learned through Christ. When you give your life to the Lord, when you become a Christian, your eyes are opened, and now you're able to see who you are. You're able to see the way that God's made you. You're able to see your identity. You're able to know with clarity what it is that God has called you to be. And so Paul says, when we're looking at the lines that make up our identity, the first thing is these lines of clarity. It's not this unknown thing, it's clarity. I can see exactly who God has called me to be, which means God has not called me to be this person. If I can be totally honest with y'all, especially the first several years where I was preaching, I would listen to other pastors and I would wonder why I wasn't that person. I would wonder why I didn't have this approach or this sense of humor or this ability to communicate. And I would spend hours listening to other preachers wondering, like, if this is who God made me to be, why am I not this? Like, I knew that God doesn't need me to be another version of another pastor. So this idea of clarity in our identity is not necessarily like, I'm good, not bad. I'm good, not bad. It's you are who God has created you and crafted you to be. God's not asking you to be a different version of someone else. We don't have to wander around in our life wondering what it is God's called us to do. And yes, there's a process of discovery, of figuring out who it is God's called you to be, but you don't have to look at other people and say, I feel like this is me. Because God's given us the clarity, Jesus gives us the clarity to say, you are exactly who I need you to be. I need you to be the best version of you, not the best version of them. And we have to know that. We have to have the ability to not wander around wondering who it is that we're supposed to be. And here's how this plays in. When we don't have clarity and you enter into a dating relationship, it's that identity drift. You will let someone else determine your identity instead of letting your identity determine your relationship. You've got to have clarity on who you are. And I would argue if you don't know who you are, it's really dangerous for you to start pursuing other people. You need to pursue your own life. You need to pursue your own calling, your own passions instead that God has given you and wired you for. Paul doesn't stop there. He talks about having this clarity, but then in the next few verses he says, since you've heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. He says, essentially, now that you have clarity on who you are, act like it. Live your life in a way that shows that you have this. The word that gets used with this is this word of conviction. You have to know, not only are you clear on what is or isn't involved, you have to have the conviction to know what does and doesn't belong. Paul talks about throw off your old self and put on your new nature. I was talking with a student who gave their life to the Lord at Winter Chill this past week, and I said it's kind of the image of this robe, and many of you, just because you've been around FSM, have heard me say this, but this is exactly what Paul's talking about. It's as if when we go through life, we have a robe that we wear, and every bad thing that we've done, every sinful thing we've done, every brokenness that we bring into the world, everything wrong is a stain or a blemish on that robe. The problem is, if you have one blemish on that robe, when you die, your eternity is in hell. The only way that we get to heaven, the only way we have a relationship with the Creator is if our robe is clean. But we can't clean it. And so Jesus lives this life, this perfect life. He doesn't sin. He doesn't do anything that he shouldn't do. He does everything that he should do. And this exchange that Paul talks about of putting on our new self is this idea that Jesus comes and he says, here's the robe that I earned. I lived a perfect life. I was killed. I died. I'm the only one who never deserved death, but I did, and I rose again because I am more powerful than death itself. And so I will take your robe covered in filth. The only way to wash it clean is to die. I will take that robe from you, and you get the robe that I have earned. And so for all of eternity, you wear the robe that Jesus earned in his life, and he takes the robe that you earned in yours. And so on the cross, Jesus suffered every single piece that you earned for him. And in heaven, you get to experience every bit of glory and righteousness that he earned for you. And so Paul says, now that you have this clarity of who you are, you need to act like it. You need to take off your old self, put on your new self. When you follow Jesus, that's that exchange that happens. And then put verse 23 back up there. I just want to highlight what he says. Let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. And hopefully when you're reading that, you're like, dude, that sounds great, but like, what does that even mean? Fortunately, he tells us. Verse 25, stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we're all part of the same body. And don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. If you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good, for hard work, and then give generously to others in need. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear. And then he says, don't bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he's identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you'll be saved on the day of redemption. Paul says, if you have clarity of who you are and the conviction of, I know what belongs in here and I know what doesn't belong in here, you've got to start to live like it. Renew your mind. And so he gives us these examples of taking the things that are in your life and repurposing them. And the examples he gives, he says, listen, if you're used to lying to people, using your words to spread false statements, instead use your words to spread truth. If your actions to other people are hurtful or anger, if you're used to putting anger and rage out into the world, instead put peace out into the world. I think if he was writing to a modern audience, he would probably say, if you spend your entire time gossiping, spreading lies, or bad information about people, instead go behind their back and spread hope. Compliment people. If you're spending your entire time worrying about your social media following, instead use your platform not to build stories about you, but to build stories about hope. When we have conviction, that means we know what belongs in and what doesn't. And sometimes that's good versus evil. Sometimes that's just identity. Good versus evil being if you cheat on tests, that's not what he has for you. Evil being, or the not for you being, who has he called you to be? Like the example of me wanting to be a pastor. Paul, I'm going to grab this handheld because my mic is coming apart on my head. And so, Paul tells us, we have to live with this clarity of knowing exactly who it is that he's called us to be. We have to live knowing who's God's made us and what that means for how we live our life. And here's what I think is true. I think a lot of you know who God's made you to be, but you don't live with the conviction of following through with that. I think it's really easy to know who God's called you to be, but then you look at this other person that you want to be in a relationship with, and you're like, okay, but these aren't bad things. Like, this isn't really that far from who God's called me to be, but you're still drifting in your identity. And when you don't live the way God's called you to live, you're missing the purpose that God has called you to live out. I can't help but wonder what happened in my life even when I let my identity drift of what God wanted to do through me, but I wasn't willing to be the person that God called me to be in the first place. Paul ends with these two verses, verse 31 and 32, and we're going to have to put it on the screen, yeah. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Next verse. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Let's put verse 31 back up there because I think this is important. Look at all of these things. Bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, slander, all types of evil. These are things that destroy relationships. These are things that break down friendships. They break down friend groups. They break down dating relationships. This is not exclusive to romance. This is just life. Paul says these things that put you at odds and in tension with other people, get them out of the way that you live. Because we're supposed to be a people that are clear. We have clarity of who we are. We're supposed to have conviction knowing who we're not and who we're supposed to be. And the last thing that we see in this is it's all about community. The purpose of you knowing who you are is not so that you can attract a significant other. The purpose of you knowing who you are is so that you can live in community the way that God designed you to live, because God did not design you to do life alone, which does not mean that he designed you to be married. Maybe you are supposed to be married, maybe you're not, but we're in this together. God is for community. And if we don't know who we are, and if we don't live the way that God's called us to live, it's really, really hard to get along. I mean, looking at that list in verse 31, again, those are the things that if you allow those, as the band comes up and we close out our time, if you allow that list of stuff in your life, bitterness, rage, anger, tearing people down with your language, talking about people behind their back, spreading lies, anything evil, those are the things that destroy marriages. Those are the things that rip apart any dating relationship. So yes, we're talking about friendship, we're talking about all of this stuff, but these are the things that will absolutely ruin what God has for you. Now, listen, the thing that I continue to see is we act like that stuff's no big deal and we're fine taking that in. The problem is when you have those things in your life and bring them into community, it no longer just hurts you. It hurts everyone else involved. And so as we dive into this series over the next few weeks of dating, relationships, sex, all of that stuff, we have to know who God has called us to be. And we have to have the security of being okay with who God has made us. Before we talk about dating, before we talk about relationships or any of that stuff, if you don't even know who you are, none of that other stuff matters. And so my hope is as we close in this time of worship, as we leave, that you would, if you don't have this clarity of who you are, that you would do the hard work of not saying, God, who is it that person wants me to be, but who is it that you've created me to be? And then letting the rest of the pieces fall however God sees fit. Because I think God's got some incredible stuff planned for y'all, and I would just hate for your identity to drift so far away because of a temporary relationship that you miss what God has for you. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much that you have given us an identity, that you have given us a purpose, that you have given us a hope and a future. And so, God, for these students who are trying to figure out those things, their identity in you, God, I pray that you would just give us the clarity to know who we are. That as we pursue you, you would reveal your heart for us. As we continue to grow in our life with you, that you would bring clarity and conviction to the people that you have called us to be, so that our identity wouldn't be dictated by the people around us, but that our identity would influence the people around us and point people to you. Because all of this centers on the fact that you have created us, you have crafted us, and you know us. We're grateful for that. Let us rest in that and put our hope and our identity and our assurance in that and in nothing else. It's your name we pray. Everybody said.